Greetings, netizens of YouTube. It may have come to your attention that Sargon of Akkad recently created a video about what he calls the Skeptic Community. It was effectively a call for unity, since there have been some distinct rumblings of discontent in recent months among anti-SJW content creators and commenters. One of the primary areas of disagreement concerns the candid issue, where many of the anti-SJW content creators decided to suspend their absolute support for free speech and skepticism of a corporate entity in return for cold hard cash from said corporation. The candid debacle, by the way, will be the subject of my next video. Sargon has shown concern that this and other disagreements within the skeptic community or anti-SJW community will have a negative impact on the effectiveness of what he calls the culture war that he believes he is leading.
But politics isn't a game you get into and come out clean on the other side. If we want to get in the trenches and fight this culture war, we're going to have to define the acceptable amounts of mud sticking to our own, so the dialogue doesn't devolve into unhelpful backbiting.
That's just a taster. Things are going to get interesting. I will demonstrate without hyperbole that Sargon has abandoned individualism, which was previously a key part of his philosophy, and has adopted collectivism as the price to pay to wage his culture war. Some of you may be familiar with the video series that Sargon made on liberalism and the perils of progressivism and collectivism. I made a video response to Sargon on the individualism versus collectivism part, pointing to the inconsistencies in his stance, to which he responded. In his video, Sargon lauded individualism as being something positive, obviously associating it with the type of liberalism he advocates, and represented collectivism as being something negative and associating it with progressivism, communism and fascism, which he opposes.
Individualism posits that the rights of the smallest unit of any society, the individual person, is the most important factor, whereas collectivism is the assertion that a specific defined group or groups take this place instead.
So, it was with interest that I watched his live stream with Harmful Opinions, who deserves credit for investigating and exposing Candid, when the subject of Sargon's Skeptic Community video and Candid were discussed. Let's start with Sargon's description of the so-called Skeptic Community.
There's no denying that there is a community.
And he later concedes.
I wouldn't necessarily call it group identity. I suppose it is in the most loose sense of the word.
So we have a defined community or group. But having some kind of collective with an identity doesn't necessarily lead to collectivism, does it?
With all collectives there is, by definition, an outgroup, created by the existence of the collective itself. The outgroup contains everyone else. People who are not affiliated with one another by anything more than being declared the common enemy by the collective, by virtue of not being the in-group.
That's all well and good. Both friends and enemies of the YouTube skeptic community would concede that their common enemy are SJWs. But Sargon is an individualist and a supporter of meritocracy, and will respect differences of opinion based on the merit of the argument, not based on which group they belong to or don't belong to. As an individualist, he would also support community self-criticism.
There's no denying that there is a community, and I don't see the point of unnecessarily antagonizing people and disrespecting people within that community. If you want to, and you want to be on the outside of it, that's fine.
Don't disrespect people within that community, but what the people outside. It's different.
I think
are you is what you're talking about in-group out-group?
Well, I suppose to a degree it is, yeah. By defining a collective, you create an in-group out-group dichotomy. There is no way to avoid this, and therefore there is no way to avoid defining the out-group as people who do not deserve the same protections as the in-group. Individualism supersedes this entirely. There is no in-group, there is no out-group. There are just individual people whose rights are sacrosanct.
It seems that Sargon believes that his skeptic community deserves respect, But what of those who hold him and members of his community to the same standard as those outside it? How much dissent can be tolerated in an in-group to the, quote, degree that he admits that his community is an in-group? Collectivists require unity among members of the group.
Basically, I think that I'm worried about the cohesion of the community. I think that's what I'm worried about, because when you get the problem is making enemies out of people who weren't enemies.
Sargon goes on to talk about how irritating it can be to deal with commenters who express views that could threaten the integrity of the community, by continuing to talk about contentious issues like Candid, and how he has taken to blocking some of them.
And this is why, and I hate that I have to do this, but I've taken to blocking certain commenters who just everything they say is just them taking something out of context and just having to dig at me for it. And it's just like, well, I don't need that. But that's what I expect from my enemy. I think it's a different kettle of fish when it's your own audience.
Just a quick suggestion, Sargon. If you want commenters to be fairer, then perhaps present them with a more even-handed or adopt a fairer approach in your videos. If you do hold your, quote, enemies, unquote, to a higher standard, it's simply a matter of time before your more intelligent subscribers start asking, why don't you abide by those same standards? It's inevitable. Yes, you have new subs coming in, but this is one of the reasons old allies of yours have parted ways with you. At the risk of digressing from the topic at hand, Harmful Opinions made some salient points on this score. Link in the description bar, by the way. Enjoy this description of higher standards that are expected of full-time YouTubers, or as Sargon likes to call, higher standards, a purity test.
Even if you find yourself as an individual, you may find at some point your own audience takes that same tack with you. And I think it's something that isn't very healthy.
That's fine.
Okay, and that's great. But my opinion is that it's not a very healthy state of affairs, because it becomes...
Well, it's not for creators, because it puts your status in jeopardy.
I'm not worried about the status. Well, I mean, what do you mean?
And
by
it puts your income in jeopardy too.
No, I'm not worried about that.
When you're concerned with people supporting?
No. That's a separate subject.
Because something like people having a too high a standard to support you, too high a standard for your stuff, will make them less likely to give you money.
No, I'm not worried about that at all.
So, Sargon or other YouTube skeptics listening, consider this an opportunity to clarify your position on collectivism or group identity with regard to your culture war against social justice warriors or progressives. Is it not true that collectivists need a common foe or foes to motivate them to strive towards a goal? In order to mobilize groups effectively, do collectivist or ideologically minded political leaders use the language of war? In order to maintain the integrity and existence of the collective, is it not true that the actions of the enemy or outgroup is frequently distorted or exaggerated to give the impression that their threat is greater than it really is? Is it not correct that cohesion of a collectivist group is more important than holding itself to the standards it expects from those it criticizes? Is it not common, under collectivist principles, that criticism of senior members of said group is not received well, and can result in the silencing of those doing the criticism? And might a collectivist mindset impact dozens of ordinary members of the group to compete with one another to attack even rational criticism of said group or its leaders? Isn't it right that one of the fundamental features of collectivism, as Sargon stated, is in-group, out-group dichotomy? I would like to think that Sargon and individualist skeptics will admit hypocrisy or at least concede inconsistency on this issue. Differences of opinion aside, I'm being genuine when I say that any such concession would be received by some at least with respect, because it would signify a degree of integrity and ability to self-reflect. But if there is a belief in sacrificing certain principles for what you believe is the greater good in defeating, quote, SJWs, unquote, then state this openly. Regardless, I'm far from the first who has noticed Sargon's move toward collectivism. Many outgroup skeptics, for want of a better word, have commented on it, as have some of his own subscribers. Please take a moment to read these comments. We're not talking just about right libertarians who don't like Sargon's support of the welfare state. Plenty of people notice this, even if nobody has seemed concerned or skeptical enough to make a video about it, until now. Before closing this video, I will do what is noticeably absent from much of the skeptic community: provide an opposing viewpoint. The inconsistency and contradictory positions held by Sargon speaks for itself. However, although it could be argued that collectivist tactics, collectivist management of a group, and in-group, out-group behavior are key elements of collectivism, it's true that the group itself, the skeptics or anti-SJWs, doesn't have stated collectivist goals. In other words, this is a group of anti-feminists, anti-SJWs, that resists further social change concerning the politics of identity. Although, it could be argued, members either directly or indirectly support the position of white men through their opposition to any group that represents minorities. In most cases, it does not represent this demographic as a specific goal. But this potential weakness in my argumentation does not negate all the other features of collectivism that are seen within the skeptic or anti-SJW community that harmful opinions successfully teased out of Sargon. Please bear in mind that this video isn't scientific in terms of providing source material, as this was not my intention. For the sake of argument, I have accepted Sargon's interpretation of individualism and collectivism, and anybody is free to answer my questions citing evidence to show where I'm in error. Finally, the, quote, "our side may not be great, but it's better than your side," unquote, argument. That inevitably will come up in the comments from those hostile to criticism of their in-group. I am quite prepared for you to judge my positions in the way I have judged Sargon's, with evidence. I have never claimed to be an individualist in the context at hand. I firmly believe that it is healthy for each individual to have a strong sense of individual identity, and consider myself that way. But I also believe that collectives have a role to play in generating positive change. And many of those past changes, almost all of us would today accept as positive. Hold each community, each individual, or each idea to the same standard. Yes, we are only human with our friendships and biases, but if the argument becomes too much about us and them, we all lose. So says the ideologue and radical leftist SJW 101.